大家好，我是 Jenny， 欢迎来到沉思者 J。 有一种导演，看他的电影一遍不够，看2遍也不够，每次看都像掉进一个新的迷宫。你以为自己找到出口了，结果发现那个出口只是另一个入口。今天我们要介绍的这个人，就是这样的创作者，他叫今敏，日本动画史上最独特的声音之一。他只拍了4部剧场版动画，1部电视动画系列，却用这5部作品让全世界的影迷永远记住他的名字。今敏1963年出生于北海道釧路市，他的童年并不特别显眼，但他从小就对漫画和绘画充满热情。这份热情带着他一路走进武藏野美术大学，在那里他学习视觉传达设计，开始磨练自己的绘画技艺。大学时代他就展现出非凡的才华。1984年，还在学生时期的他就开始在漫画杂志投稿，踏入职业漫画家的世界。毕业之后，今敏并没有马上进入动画业，他先成为了漫画家。1988年，他的短篇漫画作品开始在杂志连载。那个时期他画风细腻，故事充满独特的个人风格，但真正改变他人生走向的是他与一位传奇导演的相遇。那个人就是大友克洋，就是创作了《钢铁力士》的那位大师。今敏加入了大友克洋的工作室，协助创作漫画系列《梦枕墨的世界》。这段经历让他学到了很多，不只是技术层面的东西，更是对故事结构的深刻理解。之后今敏又跟另一位传奇人物合作，那就是押井守。他参与了押井守导演的动画电影制作，在这个过程中他深刻感受到动画这个媒介可以走向多远的地方，可以探索多深的人类心理。这2段师承关系就像2条河流在今敏的灵魂里交汇，塑造了他后来的创作哲学。1997年，今敏34岁，他执导了自己的第1部动画长片，片名叫做《未妈的部屋》。这部作品一出世就震惊了整个动画界。故事说的是一个偶像歌手转型为演员的年轻女孩，叫做雾月未麻。她在追逐演艺事业的过程中，开始分不清现实与幻想的界限。有人在模仿她的生活，有人在追踪她的一举一动，而她自己也慢慢开始怀疑，眼前看到的究竟是真实的世界，还是她自己构建出来的幻觉。这部电影在技术层面上已经非常惊人。今敏用一种叫做错位剪接的手法，让现实和幻想之间的切换几乎无缝无痕。一个场景的最后一幕，直接接上另一个完全不同情境的第一幕，但2个画面在构图或动作上却高度相似，这让观众完全来不及察觉自己已经从现实跨入了幻想，或者从幻想回到了现实。未麻的部屋在当年并没有在日本院线大规模上映，但它透过国际影展传到了世界各地，在美国在欧洲引发了强烈回响。有一位好莱坞导演看了这部电影之后，深深为之着迷，他买下了这部电影里一个浴缸场景的版权，把类似的概念用在自己的电影里。那位导演就是达伦阿罗诺夫斯基，他的电影《安魂曲》里那个著名的浴缸场景，灵感正是来自未麻的部屋。后来他的黑天鹅也被很多人认为深受今敏影响。2001年，今敏带来了他的第2部作品《千年女优》。这部电影是对日本电影史的一封情书。故事是这样的，一个纪录片导演去采访一位已经隐退多年的传奇女演员，在访谈的过程中，女演员开始回忆她的一生，而那些回忆和她演过的电影角色开始交错融合，现实的回忆和戏中的剧情不再有清楚的边界。今敏在《千年女优》里展现了她对时间的独特感受，过去和现在可以同时存在，一个人的一生可以用电影的语言压缩再压缩，让你在2小时内感受到几十年的悲欢离合。这部电影在日本安纳西动画影展等重要舞台都获得极高评价，被许多影评人列为史上最伟大的动画电影之一。主角藤原千代子这个角色，也成为动画史上最令人动容的女性形象之一。2003年，今敏的第3部作品来了，《东京教父》。 这一次他做了一个让很多人意外的选择。前2部作品都是充满心理悬疑的复杂叙事，但《东京教父》却是一个温暖的公路电影。故事说的是3个无家可游的人，在圣诞夜的东京，在垃圾堆里捡到了一个被遗弃的婴儿，他们决定寻找婴儿的亲生父母。在这个过程中，东京的城市风景、人与人之间的缘分，还有各自不愿说出口的伤痛，一一浮出水面。东京教父展现了今敏的另一面，那种细腻观察日常生活的能力。东京街头的小细节，无家可游者的日常，被社会遗忘的角落，他都画得非常真实，非常有温度。这部电影让很多人看完之后想打电话给家人，那种关于家的情感，被今敏用最朴素的方式触动了。2004年，今敏把注意力转向了电视动画，他执导了13集的系列作品《妄想代理人》。这个故事从一个看似普通的都市犯罪事件开始，一个戴着棒球帽、踩着溜冰鞋的少年，用一根弯曲的金属棒攻击了街头的路人。警方开始调查，但越调查越发现，这个案件背后隐藏着更深的东西。每个被攻击的受害者都在被攻击之前承受着巨大的心理压力。那个谜样的少年被称为少年蝙蝠，似乎是从受害者的心理深渊中诞生出来的存在。妄想代理人是今敏对当代日本社会的一次深刻批判，他描绘了压力、焦虑、自我欺骗，以及在现代都市生活中逐渐失去自我的危机。每一集都可以独立成一个故事，但所有故事又在最后汇聚成一个震撼的整体。这部作品的主题曲也非常有名，那段歌词在描述人们如何在幻想中寻找逃脱现实的出口，让很多观众印象深刻。2006年，今敏带来了他最后一部完整作品《盗梦侦探》，原著是筒井康隆的小说，故事设定在一个科技高度发达的未来，科学家发明了一种叫做直梦机的装置，可以让人进入他人的梦境，协助心理治疗。但这种技术一旦被恶意使用，后果将不堪设想。女主角千叶敦子博士有另一个自我，叫做帕普里卡，她能在梦境世界自由穿梭，但有人开始利用这个技术，让现实世界和梦境世界开始混合崩溃。盗梦侦探在视觉上达到了今敏创作的巅峰，梦境中的城市街道，各种文化符号和意象的疯狂拼贴，物理规律完全失效的世界，这些画面让观众目不暇接，又同时充满深层的象征意义。2010年，克里斯多弗·诺兰的电影全面启动上映，很多人立刻注意到，他和《盗梦侦探》在主题和某些视觉概念上有相当高的相似度。诺兰本人虽然没有明确承认直接引用，但《盗梦侦探》对全面启动的影响已经是影迷圈广泛讨论的话题。今敏的电影有一个非常重要的特色，就是他对女性角色的塑造。未麻、千代子、帕普里卡，这些女性角色都不是配角，不是花瓶，她们是故事的核心，是推动整个叙事的灵魂，而且她们都面对着一个共同的主题：身份认同。在现代社会中，一个人如何定义自己是谁？当外界的期待和内心的真实产生冲突的时候，该怎么办？这个问题在今敏的作品里从来没有一个简单的答案，但他的电影让你不得不去思考。今敏还有一个让很多影迷津津乐道的技术，就是所谓的今敏剪辑法。他发明了一种非常独特的剪接方式，让2个完全不同的场景透过画面构图或动作的相似性进行无缝的衔接和跳转。这种方式不只在他自己的作品里频繁出现，也启发了很多后来的导演和动画师，成为电影教科书里会被引用的经典技法。然而命运是残忍的，2010年，今敏被诊断出患有胰脏癌，这个消息对所有认识他的人都是晴天霹雳。更残酷的是，癌症已经到了末期，那一年他才46岁，距离他最后一部完整作品《盗梦侦探》的上映也才过了4年。他还有太多想说的话，还有太多想拍的故事。他的第5部长片主曲物语的企划 才刚刚开始筹备，就不得不停下来。今敏在生命的最后一段时间，依然保持著作家的本能。他在个人部落格上写下了一篇长文，回顾自己的创作生涯，感谢所有支持过他的人，也对还没能实现的计划表达了遗憾。那篇文章的最后一句话，短短几个字，在日文里的意思是好，睡一下，然后再见了。这几个字让无数读到的人潸然泪下。那是一个创作者在面对死亡时最后的幽默，最后的温柔，最后的不舍。2010年8月24日，今敏离开了这个世界，享年46岁。当天全球的动画迷和电影迷在网络上留下了无数的哀思。很多人说，动画这个媒介失去了它最重要的声音之一，但今敏并没有真正离开，它的影响至今仍在扩散。除了达伦·阿罗诺夫斯基和克里斯多弗·诺兰之外，许多其他导演也承认深受他的影响。他对心理现实主义的探索，他对梦境与现实边界的消融，他对身份认同与媒体文化的批判，这些主题在今天的电影和动画里依然持续被继承和发展。今敏的创作不只停留在电影层面，他对动画作为艺术媒介的思考是非常系统性的。他曾多次在访谈中谈到，日本动画长期以来有一个局限，就是过度依赖特定类型的故事模式，英雄冒险、机甲战斗，或者纯粹娱乐性的轻松喜剧。他并不排斥这些类型，但他相信动画可以做到更多，可以像文学一样探索人的内心，可以像现代艺术一样挑战观众的感知。在未麻的部屋里有一幕非常著名的场景，未麻站在镜子前，看着镜子里的自己，但镜子里的那个影像开始做出和他不一样的动作，那个他以为自己认识的脸孔变成了一个陌生人。这个场景短短几秒钟，但它传递的心理冲击延续了几十年。很多心理学家和媒体学者后来引用这个场景来讨论偶像工业如何塑造和消耗人的身份认同。今敏在筹备《千年女优》时做了大量的研究，他深入研究了日本电影的整个发展脉络，从战前的无声电影时代，一直到当代的商业电影。他把这些时代的电影风格一一融入了主角千代子所演过的角色之中，每一次时代的切换都对应着日本电影史的某个特定时期。那种对历史细节的认真，让《千年女优》不只是一部动画电影，更像是一份写给日本电影的情书，也是一份充满热情的电影史课程。《千年女优》里有一个反复出现的意象，就是追逐。主角千代子的整个人生都在追逐一个她年轻时遇见的男人，她从来没有再见到他，但这份追逐的执念让她走遍了各种电影场景中的山川大地，从古代的宫廷到现代的废墟，从春天的花海到战争的炮火。今敏用这个简单的意象说出了一件非常深刻的事情，有时候人不是在追逐一个人，而是在追逐一种感觉，一个关于自己的梦，而那个梦本身比任何真实的相遇都更真实。东京教父的主角群也值得特别介绍，3个无家可游的人物。第一个是金，一个中年男性，曾经是自行车赛手，因为欠债跑路，抛下了妻子和女儿。第二个是花，一个还没有完成性别转换的人物，曾经在夜晚工作，拥有一颗极度温柔的心。第三个是美由纪，一个离家出走的少女，她和父亲之间有着深深的误会。这3个人物每一个都带着伤，每一个都以为自己的故事已经结束了，但在那个圣诞夜，那个被遗弃的婴儿让他们各自的故事重新开始。今敏的妄想代理人在创作上有一个特别之处，每一集都可以聚焦在完全不同的人物身上。有一集非常著名，讲的是3个试图一起自杀的人，他们计划在各种地点了结生命，但每次计划都被出乎意料的荒诞事件打断。这集在沉重的主题之下，却用了非常荒诞喜剧的叙事手法，让人哭笑不得。这正是今敏独特的地方，他可以在最黑暗的题材里 找到令人意想不到的光，或者在最荒诞的情况里，找到令人心疼的真实。盗梦侦探的制作过程也留下了很多有趣的故事。今敏和他的制作团队花了大量时间研究梦境的本质，他们阅读了大量心理学文献，采访了从事梦境研究的学者，尝试去理解梦境在视觉上是什么样的。梦境中的空间感是扭曲的，时间是非线性的，逻辑是跳跃的，但同时梦境对做梦的人来说又是完全真实的。今敏把这些特质全部融入了帕普里卡的视觉设计之中，那场著名的祭典游行场景，把各种文化符号混在一起，变成一个疯狂又令人着迷的视觉洪流，是动画史上最难忘的场景之一。今敏的工作方式也很值得一提，他是一个非常严格的完美主义者，对每一个镜头的构图，每一个角色的动作，每一个场景的光线和颜色都有极高的要求。他的共同制片人和搭档今敏组合的伙伴，制片人星野康二曾说，和今敏合作就是要做好心理准备，因为他永远不会满足于差不多就好，他永远在追求更好。这种态度也反映在他的作品质量上，他的每一部电影都有极高的制作水准，没有任何一帧是马虎的。今敏去世之后，很多人开始整理和研究他留下的影响，大家发现他对现代电影的影响比表面上看起来更加深远。除了我们已经提到的好莱坞作品之外，很多日本后辈动画导演也深受他影响。他开创的那种把现实与幻想交错的叙事手法，已经成为一种成熟的电影语言，被许多创作者继承和发展。他对女性主角的细腻塑造，也为后来的动画女主角塑造树立了新的标准。今敏的未完成作品《竹取物语》是个遗憾，这个计划是要以日本最古老的文学之一，一个关于月亮公主辉夜姬的故事为基础，制作一部完全不同风格的动画长片。虽然今敏没能完成它，但这个题材后来被另一位日本动画大师高勋拍成了电影。高田勋版本的《辉夜姬物语》在某种程度上让人想到今敏未能完成的梦。今敏的故事告诉我们一件事，伟大的艺术不需要大量的作品，5部作品可以比50部更有力量。关键在于每一部作品是否都充满了诚意，是否都在尝试说一些真正值得说的话，是否都在挑战观众，而不只是满足他们。今敏做到了这一点，他的每一部作品都有一个核心的问题，那个问题可能让你不舒服，可能让你困惑，但他永远让你思考。今敏曾经说过一句话，他说动画可以做到任何真人电影做不到的事情，但这并不代表动画就应该只是拍给小孩子看的。他相信动画可以像任何形式的艺术一样，去触碰最深刻的人类经验，最复杂的情感，最难以言说的心理状态。他用自己短短的一生，用5部作品证明了这件事。如果你从来没有看过今敏的作品，那么从现在开始还不晚。无论是充满心理悬疑的未麻的部屋，还是对电影史的温柔致敬千年女优，还是温暖人心的东京教父，还是充满视觉奇观的盗梦侦探，每一部都是独一无二的体验，每一部都会让你想到很多，感受到很多。今敏喜欢探索一个问题，什么是真实？在他的电影里，现实从来不是一个稳固的东西，它是可以被质疑的，可以被颠覆的，可以和梦境互相渗透的。也许他想告诉我们的是，我们每个人每天都活在自己建构的现实里，而那个现实究竟有多少是真的，有多少是我们自己的愿望和恐惧投射出来的，值得我们好好想一想。他走得太早了，整个动画世界在那一刻停顿了一下，然后继续向前，带着他留下的东西，带着他开创的可能性，带着他那个关于现实和梦境的永远的问题。今敏，一个用动画说梦话的人，一个让你分不清醒着和睡着的界限的人，一个只用了短短10几年，就让世界的电影史必须重写几行文字的人。谢谢你，今敏，我们下次见咯。Hello everyone, I am Jenny. Welcome to Thinker J. There is a type of filmmaker whose work demands more than one viewing. Watch it twice and you still feel like you have missed something. Every time you return, you find yourself lost in a new labyrinth. Just when you think you have found the exit, you realize it was only another entrance. The person we are introducing today is exactly that kind of creator. His name is Satoshi Kon, one of the most distinctive voices in the entire history of Japanese animation. He directed only 4 feature films and 1 television anime series. Yet with just these 5 works, he left an impression on the world of cinema that will never fade. Satoshi Kon was born in 1963 in Kushiro, a city on the northern island of Hokkaido. His childhood was not particularly remarkable by any obvious measure. But from a very young age he was filled with passion for manga and drawing. That passion carried him all the way to Musashino Art University in Tokyo, where he studied visual communication design and steadily sharpened his artistic skills. Even as a student he displayed exceptional talent. In 1984, while still enrolled at the university, he began submitting work to manga magazines and took his first professional steps as a manga artist. After graduation, Kon did not immediately enter the animation industry. He first pursued a career as a manga creator. By 1988, his short manga stories were appearing in magazines regularly. His illustration style was meticulous and his stories had a distinctly personal flavor that set him apart. But the encounter that truly redirected the course of his life came through one of the legendary figures of Japanese manga. That figure was Katsuhiro Otomo, the creator of the landmark manga series Akira. Kon joined the studio of Otomo and worked on a manga project connected to the novelist Bakuyama Makura. This period taught him a great deal, not merely on a technical level, but in terms of understanding story structure and visual narrative at a much deeper level. After that experience, Kon went on to collaborate with another towering figure in Japanese animation. That was Mamoru Oshii, the visionary director known for his philosophical approach to storytelling. Working alongside Oshii allowed Kon to see firsthand how far the medium of animation could be pushed. How deeply it could explore the human psyche. How completely it could deconstruct the boundary between the internal world and external reality. These 2 formative relationships, with Otomo and with Oshii, were like 2 rivers converging inside the creative soul of Satoshi Kon. Together they shaped the philosophy that would define everything he made afterward. In 1997, at the age of 34, Satoshi Kon directed his first animated feature film. The title was Perfect Blue. The moment it appeared, it sent a shockwave through the animation world. The story follows a young woman named Mima Kirigo, a pop idol who decides to leave her singing group behind and reinvent herself as a dramatic actress. As she pursues this new path in the entertainment industry, she begins to lose her grip on the line between reality and illusion. Someone seems to be mimicking her life, cataloging her every movement. She begins to doubt what she is actually seeing. She can no longer be certain whether what is in front of her is the real world or a projection born from her own fractured mind. On a purely technical level, Perfect Blue was already extraordinary. Kon employed a technique of dissonant editing, cutting between scenes in a way that made the transition between reality and fantasy nearly invisible. The final image of one scene would dissolve into the opening image of a completely different situation, linked by a shared visual composition or physical gesture. This technique left audiences with no time to register that they had crossed from the real into the imagined, or from the imagined back into the real. Perfect Blue did not receive a wide theatrical release in Japan when it first appeared. But it traveled through international film festivals and reached audiences around the world. In the United States and across Europe it generated a powerful response. One particular Hollywood filmmaker watched the film and became deeply fascinated by it. He purchased the rights to a specific bathtub scene from the film so that he could incorporate a similar concept into one of his own movies. That filmmaker was Darren Aronofsky. The famous bathtub sequence in his film Requiem for a Dream was directly inspired by a scene in Perfect Blue. Many critics and filmmakers later observed that his film Black Swan also showed unmistakable traces of his influence. In 2001, Kon brought his second feature film to the world. He called it Millennium Actress. This film is a love letter to the entire history of Japanese cinema. The story centers on a documentary filmmaker who travels to interview a legendary actress who retired from the screen many decades earlier. As the interview unfolds, the actress begins to recall her life. And as she does, those memories and the characters she played in her films start to blur together and intertwine. The boundary between her actual memories and the roles she inhabited on screen dissolves completely. In Millennium Actress, Kon revealed his extraordinary feeling for time. The past and the present can coexist simultaneously. An entire human life can be compressed through the language of cinema until 70 years of joy and sorrow are felt within the space of 2 hours. This film received extremely high praise at major international events including the Annecy International Animated Film Festival in France. Countless critics have placed it among the greatest animated films ever made. The protagonist, Chiyoko Fujiwara, became one of the most deeply moving female characters in the history of animation. In 2003, Kon surprised many with his third feature film. He called it Tokyo Godfathers. This time he made a choice that caught his audience off guard. His first 2 films had been psychologically complex and deliberately disorienting narratives. But Tokyo Godfathers was a warm road movie with a beating human heart at its center. The story follows 3 homeless people living on the streets of Tokyo. On Christmas Eve, while rummaging through a pile of garbage, they discover an abandoned newborn baby. They decide to search the city for the birth parents of the child. As their journey unfolds, the details of Tokyo come alive around them. Chance encounters and coincidences pile up in ways both funny and heartbreaking. And the unspoken pain each of the 3 characters carries inside them slowly rises to the surface. Tokyo Godfathers revealed a completely different dimension of the artistry of Kon. His ability to observe the fine details of everyday life with total precision and genuine warmth. The small corners of Tokyo that most people walk past without noticing. The texture of life on the margins of an enormous city. He rendered all of it with truth and with tenderness. Many viewers finished this film and immediately wanted to call someone they loved. Kon reached something fundamental about home and belonging, and he did it through the simplest possible means. In 2004, Kon turned his attention to a television anime series. He directed 13 episodes of a series called Paranoia Agent. The story begins with what seems to be an ordinary urban crime. A mysterious boy wearing a baseball cap and rollerblades, carrying a bent metal bat, begins attacking people on the streets of Tokyo. As detectives investigate the case, they begin to discover that there is something far deeper behind what initially appeared to be a straightforward criminal matter. Every victim had been carrying immense psychological pressure in the days before the attack. The enigmatic boy, who becomes known as Lil Slugger in some translations, seemed to emerge from the darkest recesses of his victims' minds. Paranoia Agent was the most direct by Kon and sustained critique of contemporary Japanese society. He examined the weight of social pressure, the mechanisms of anxiety and self-deception, and the crisis of identity that comes with living in a modern urban environment where people are expected to perform versions of themselves that have nothing to do with who they actually are. Each episode functions as a self-contained story, yet every story flows into a larger whole that builds toward a genuinely staggering conclusion. The series demonstrated that Kon could sustain his vision across a long-form narrative just as powerfully as he could in the concentrated space of a feature film. In 2006, Kon completed his 4th and final finished feature. It was called Paprika, based on the novel of the same name by the author Yasutaka Tsutsui. The story is set in a near future where scientists have developed a device called the DC Mini that allows one person to enter another person's dream state, using this technology as a powerful tool for psychological therapy. But when this device falls into the wrong hands, the consequences begin to fracture reality itself. A scientist named Dr. Atsuko Chiba has an alter ego inside the dream world named Paprika. Paprika moves freely through dream space with total confidence and joy. But someone is using this stolen technology to merge the dream world and the waking world in ways that no one can control. On a visual level, Paprika represented the absolute peak of his creative output. Dream city streets transformed into impossible carnivals of cultural imagery. Physical laws suspended entirely. Sequences in which the logic of cinema itself seemed to bend and reshape in real time. In 2010, Christopher Nolan released his film Inception. Audiences and critics immediately noted significant thematic and visual similarities between Inception and Paprika. While Nolan himself has not publicly drawn a direct line between the 2 films, the influence of Paprika on the broader landscape of cinema, and on Inception specifically, has been widely discussed and debated among filmmakers and film scholars ever since. There is one quality of the work of Kon that stands apart from everything else and demands special recognition. That is the way he wrote and directed female characters. Mima in Perfect Blue, Chiyoko in Millennium Actress, Paprika in the film that bears her name. None of these women are supporting characters. None of them exist to decorate a story told by or for someone else. They are the core of each narrative. They are the soul that drives everything forward. And all of them grapple with a shared and urgent theme, the question of identity. How does a person define who they are in the face of a society that is constantly projecting roles and expectations onto them? When the image the world constructs of you collides with the person you know yourself to be, what do? Kon never offered simple answers. But he constructed films that made it impossible not to sit with the question. There is also a technical innovation attributed to Kon that has become a reference point in film studies. It is sometimes called the Kon cut. He developed a distinctive style of editing in which two completely unrelated scenes are joined through a shared visual composition or a matched physical action, creating a seamless bridge between realities. This technique appeared repeatedly throughout his own work and went on to inspire many directors and animators who came after him. It has been analyzed and taught in film schools as a significant contribution to the grammar of cinema. But fate showed no mercy. In 2010, Satoshi Kon was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The news devastated everyone who knew him and everyone who cared about his work. Even more brutal was the fact that the cancer had already reached its final stage. That year he was only 46 years old. Only 4 years had passed since the release of Paprika, his most recent completed film. He still had so much he wanted to say. So many stories he wanted to tell. His planned fifth feature, a project based on the ancient Japanese legend of the bamboo cutter, had only just begun its development when everything had to stop. In the final months of his life, Kon retained the instinct of a writer to the very end. He wrote a long essay on his personal blog, looking back over his career and thanking everyone who had supported him along the way. He also expressed, with characteristic honesty, his sadness about the projects he would never be able to finish. The final line of that essay was just a few words. In Japanese, the meaning was something close to saying, "Now, let me sleep for a little while, and then goodbye." Those words moved countless readers to tears. They were the last gesture of a creator facing death. The final expression of his humor. His gentleness. His reluctance to leave. On August 24, 2010, Satoshi Kon left this world. He was 46 years old. That day, fans of animation and cinema around the world filled the internet with their grief. Many wrote that the medium of animation had lost one of its most essential voices. But Satoshi Kon has not truly departed. His influence continues to spread. Beyond Darren Aronofsky and Christopher Nolan, many other directors have acknowledged his work as a formative reference. His exploration of psychological realism in animation. His dissolution of the border between dreams and waking life. His critique of identity in media culture and the way modern society asks people to perform constructed versions of themselves. These themes continue to be inherited and developed in film and animation today. Kon once expressed the belief that animation is capable of things no live-action film can achieve. But he was equally insistent that this capability does not mean animation should be reserved for children. He believed that animation, like any form of art, could reach into the deepest layers of human experience. The most complex emotions. The psychological states that ordinary language struggles to name. He spent his brief life proving that belief with 5 works. And the proof is undeniable. If you have never seen a film by Satoshi Kon, it is never too late to begin. Whether you start with the psychological thriller Perfect Blue, or the tender cinematic tribute of Millennium Actress, or the deeply human warmth of Tokyo Godfathers, or the dazzling visual invention of Paprika, each one is a completely irreplaceable experience. Each one will give you something to carry with you. Each one will make you think and feel in ways that are difficult to articulate but impossible to forget. The thinking of Kon about animation as an artistic medium was not confined to the films themselves. He reflected on the limitations of mainstream Japanese animation repeatedly in interviews and public statements. For too long, he believed, the dominant modes had been action-adventure, giant robot narratives, and lightweight comedies designed purely for entertainment. He had nothing against those traditions, but he was convinced that animation was capable of much more. It could explore the interior life of a human being with the same depth and honesty as literature. It could challenge perception and question reality the way avant-garde visual art does. He spent his career turning that conviction into evidence. In Perfect Blue there is one scene that has been discussed and analyzed more than perhaps any other moment in the film. Mima stands before a mirror and looks at her own reflection. But the image in the mirror begins to move independently, making gestures that do not match her own. The face she thought she knew becomes the face of a stranger. That scene lasts only a few seconds. Yet the psychological impact it carries has resonated across decades. Psychologists, media scholars, and cultural critics have cited it repeatedly in discussions about how the idol industry constructs and then consumes the identity of the performers it elevates. In preparing Millennium Actress, Kon conducted deep and meticulous research into the entire arc of Japanese cinema history. He traced the development of film from the silent era before World War II all the way through to the contemporary commercial landscape. He then embedded each of those historical periods into the specific film roles that Chiyoko, the protagonist, had played throughout her career. Every shift in era corresponds to a recognizable stylistic moment in the history of Japanese filmmaking. That commitment to historical detail meant that Millennium Actress was never merely an animated feature. It functioned simultaneously as a passionate love letter to Japanese cinema and as a deeply personal film history lesson compressed into a breathtaking 90 minutes. One image recurs throughout Millennium Actress with particular insistence: the image of pursuit. The entire life of Chiyoko, spanning decades of change in Japan, is organized around the act of chasing someone she encountered briefly as a young woman. She never finds him again. But that pursuit, and the sense of longing it generates, carries her through every kind of landscape her film career demands of her. Ancient imperial courts, bombed ruins, fields of spring flowers, the chaos of war. Kon used this single image to say something quietly profound. Sometimes what a person chases is not really another person at all. It is a feeling, a dream about who they are and what their life can mean. And that dream, for some people, is more real than any actual reunion could ever be. The three central characters of Tokyo Godfathers each deserve individual attention. The first is Jin, a middle-aged man who was once a competitive cyclist. Driven away by debt, he abandoned his wife and daughter and ended up on the streets, carrying that departure like a wound he refuses to tend. The second is Hana, a person whose sense of self does not match the body they were born into, who once worked in the nighttime economy of the city and who possesses a heart of almost overwhelming tenderness. The third is Miyuki, a teenage girl who ran away from home after a terrible misunderstanding with her father. Each of these three individuals carries the weight of a story that seems to have reached its end. Each of them has made a kind of peace, however uncomfortable, with the idea that they belong nowhere. But on that Christmas Eve, the abandoned infant they find in the garbage forces each of their stories to start again. Paranoia Agent contained one episode in particular that has stayed with viewers more than almost any other. It follows three people who have each decided, independently, to end their lives. They come together by chance and agree to attempt the act together. But every plan they make is interrupted by something completely absurd. An unexpected rainstorm. A construction site that appears from nowhere. A sudden intrusion of the ordinary world into their most extreme moment. Kon used this episode to hold two seemingly incompatible registers at once. The subject matter was as serious as anything in his work. But the storytelling approach was closer to dark comedy, almost farcical in its pacing. The result was devastating in a way that a purely serious approach might never have achieved. This was one of the rarest gifts of Kon, the ability to find an unexpected light inside the darkest material, and an unbearable truth inside what appeared to be pure absurdity. The production of Paprika generated its own body of stories. Kon and his team spent considerable time studying the nature of dreams not just as a concept but as a concrete visual experience. They read extensively in psychological literature. They sought out researchers who studied dream states. They tried to understand what it actually feels like to be inside a dream from the inside. Dreams distort spatial relationships. They do not obey linear time. Their logic makes leaps that the waking mind would never permit. And yet for the person experiencing the dream, every element feels entirely real. Kon translated all of these qualities directly into the visual design of Paprika. The famous parade sequence, in which cultural symbols and images from across human civilization are thrown together into a single surging river of motion, is routinely cited as one of the most unforgettable sequences in animation history. The working method of Kon also deserves attention in any honest account of his life. He was a thoroughgoing perfectionist. Every shot composition, every character movement, every quality of light and color in every scene was subject to his exacting standard. His long-term producing partner has spoken about what it meant to collaborate with Kon. It meant being prepared for the fact that he would never accept something that was merely adequate. He was always in pursuit of something better. That relentlessness is visible in every frame of every work he completed. There is no scene in any of his films that feels careless. There is no sequence that feels like it was finished because the deadline arrived. Every part of every film reflects the same degree of attention. After the death of Kon, scholars and critics began the work of mapping the full scale of his influence. What they found was that his reach into modern cinema was even broader than it had appeared on the surface. Beyond the Hollywood filmmakers already mentioned, many directors and animators in Japan and internationally have acknowledged his work as a primary reference. The narrative technique of interweaving reality with fantasy that he developed and refined has become an established part of the cinematic vocabulary. It is now a mode that many creators use, sometimes without knowing precisely where it originated. His approach to female protagonists, giving them complexity, interiority, and genuine narrative centrality, also raised a standard that shaped what came after him. The unfinished project that Kon had been developing, based on the ancient Japanese tale of a princess born from a bamboo stalk and her eventual return to the moon, remains one of the great unfinished chapters in animation history. He never had the chance to bring that vision to completion. Years later, another great figure of Japanese animation addressed the same source material in his own way. But what the version Kon had envisioned might have become, filtered through his particular sensibility and his mastery of the boundary between the real and the imagined, is a question that can only remain open. What the story of Kon ultimately demonstrates is that greatness in art does not require a vast quantity of work. 5 works can carry more weight and leave a deeper mark than 50. What matters is whether each work is made with complete honesty, whether it asks a question worth asking, whether it challenges the person receiving it rather than simply gratifying them. Kon met that standard every single time. Each of his works is built around a question that may leave you unsettled. That may make you uncertain. But that will never let you stop thinking. To understand why Perfect Blue landed with such force, it helps to consider the cultural moment into which it arrived. The late 1990s in Japan were a time of intense anxiety around media celebrity and the machinery that produced it. Idol culture had reached a level of industrial sophistication where young performers were shaped, packaged, and promoted not simply as entertainers but as idealized projections onto which audiences were encouraged to map their own fantasies. Mima Kirigo, the protagonist of Perfect Blue, is a product of that system, and the film is relentless in examining what that system does to a person from the inside. When Mima attempts to leave the controlled and carefully managed identity of the pop idol behind and step into the more complicated and unpredictable space of dramatic acting, the industry does not let her go easily. Her fan base fractures. A dedicated and deeply disturbed admirer begins to construct a parallel version of her life online, written in her voice, documenting her every movement as though she herself were narrating it. The film uses this stalker narrative not merely as a thriller device but as a precise metaphor for the way celebrity culture strips away the private self and replaces it with a public image that eventually develops its own appetite and its own will. The editing technique that Kon developed and deployed throughout Perfect Blue deserves more specific description because it is genuinely unlike anything that had appeared in animation before it. A conventional cut between 2 scenes functions as a punctuation mark, a clear signal to the viewer that they are moving from one moment to another. What Kon did was something far more subtle and far more disorienting. He would end a scene on a visual composition, perhaps a specific angle of a face, or a particular quality of light, or an arm raised in a specific way, and then begin the next scene with a composition that matched the first in its formal structure but existed in a completely different reality. The visual rhyme between the 2 images disguised the gap between them, letting the viewer slide from one space into another without feeling the cut. The effect was not simply aesthetic. It replicated the subjective experience of a mind losing its grip on the distinction between what actually happened and what was imagined, feared, or desired. Millennium Actress builds its most powerful effects through a similarly innovative structural choice. The 2 filmmakers who have come to interview the retired actress, Chiyoko, are themselves drawn physically into her memories as they unfold. They appear inside her recollections, sometimes as witnesses and sometimes as participants in the stories she is telling. This device dissolves the conventional distance between the interviewer and the subject, between the person recording a life and the life being recorded. It also raises a question that the film holds open until its final moments. Are the filmmakers uncovering the truth of the life of Chiyoko, or are they co-creating a version of it? Is any act of remembering also an act of invention? Kon was deeply interested in the idea that memory and cinema operate according to the same fundamental logic. Both take raw experience and shape it, select from it, and give it a form that did not exist in the original moment. The score composed by Susumu Hirasawa for several of his films also deserves acknowledgement. Hirasawa, who had already established himself as a pioneering figure in electronic music, brought to those films a sonic world that felt simultaneously ancient and futuristic, organic and digital. The music for Millennium Actress in particular has an emotional grandeur that lifts scenes already dense with feeling into something close to overwhelming. The collaboration between Kon and Hirasawa was one of the great director-composer partnerships in Japanese animation, comparable in its creative harmony to the relationships that Hayao Miyazaki built with Joe Hisaishi. By the time Paprika arrived in 2006, Kon had refined his visual sensibility to a point where the film reads almost as a summation of everything he had been exploring. The sequences inside the dream world are not simply surreal for the sake of visual spectacle, though the spectacle is undeniable. Each dream image carries a layer of meaning that rewards close attention. The parade of possessed objects and cultural symbols that recurs throughout the film is not random. It represents the way accumulated cultural imagery saturates the unconscious mind, the way images from history and advertising and entertainment all pile up inside us and shape our inner lives without our knowing it. The villain of the film is not simply a person who wants power. He is a person who cannot accept the existence of a self that cannot be controlled, and his desire to invade and reshape the dream world is a projection of the same pathology that Kon had been examining in different forms since his very first feature. The response to his passing from within the Japanese animation industry revealed something important about how he was regarded by his peers. Many of the most respected figures in the field offered tributes that went beyond conventional professional respect. They spoke of him as someone who had expanded the idea of what the medium was capable of, someone whose absence would create a gap that could not simply be filled by the next generation of talented filmmakers. The director Hayao Miyazaki, whose relationship with Kon had its complicated dimensions given the profound differences in their approaches to what animation should be and who it should be for, nonetheless acknowledged the significance of the loss. The sense within the community was that Kon had been in the middle of something, that his work had been building toward a next stage that would never now arrive. There is a particular way that his films handle the moment when a character confronts the gap between the person they are and the person others have decided they are. In Perfect Blue, it is the moment Mima sees her former idol self standing in her apartment, demanding to know why she has abandoned the innocence that made her beloved. In Millennium Actress, it is the moment Chiyoko realizes that the man she has spent her life pursuing may have been less important than the act of pursuit itself. In Tokyo Godfathers, it is the moment each of the three homeless characters is forced to acknowledge, through their efforts to protect an infant they did not ask for, that their stories are not actually over. In Paprika, it is the moment the boundary between Dr. Chiba and her alter ego dissolves, revealing that the division between the controlled, professional self and the free, intuitive self was never as stable as either believed. These moments of confrontation between the constructed self and some deeper truth are the emotional centers of his cinema. They are the moments he returns to, in different forms, across every work he completed. They are also, not coincidentally, the moments that feel most genuinely alive. Kon loved to explore one central question: what is real? In his films, reality is never a stable or reliable foundation. It can be questioned. It can be overturned. It can be permeated by dreams and invaded by imagination. Perhaps what he was trying to tell us is that each of us lives every day inside a reality we have constructed for ourselves. And it is worth pausing to ask how much of that reality is genuinely true, and how much of it is a projection of our own desires and fears. He left far too soon. The entire world of animation paused for a moment when he was gone. Then it moved forward again, carrying what he had left behind. Carrying the possibilities he had opened. Carrying his eternal question about the line between the dreaming mind and the waking world. It is worth spending a moment on the question of why Satoshi Kon remains so relevant today, more than 15 years after his death. The answer has something to do with the particular set of anxieties that defined his era and that have only intensified since then. The pressure of public identity, the fracture between the self we perform and the self we inhabit, the way media technologies accelerate and amplify our capacity to construct alternate versions of reality, these were the themes that animated every one of his works, and they are also the themes that define the contemporary moment more completely than almost anything else. In a world where social media has industrialized the production and consumption of personal identity on a scale that would have been unimaginable in 1997 when Perfect Blue appeared, the questions he was asking have become not more dated but more urgent. The word that many critics reach for when trying to describe the experience of watching a Satoshi Kon film is prescient. He seemed to understand, through the particular sensitivity of a great artist, where the culture was going before most people had any clear sense of direction. He saw that the boundary between media image and lived experience was becoming more porous. He saw that people would increasingly construct their lives in relation to images of themselves rather than in relation to some unmediated inner reality. He saw that the machinery of entertainment would extract more and more from the people who fed into it. And he made films that tried to hold all of that complexity without reducing it to a simple message, without telling the audience what to think or how to feel. He respected the audience enough to leave the questions open. There is one more dimension of his legacy worth honoring. Satoshi Kon was a Japanese creator who achieved genuine international reach not by smoothing away the specificity of his cultural context but by going deeper into it. His films are dense with references to Japanese cinema history, to the texture of Japanese urban life, to the particular pressures and configurations of Japanese popular culture. And yet they traveled to France and the United States and across the world and found audiences who recognized themselves in them. This is what great art does. It does not universalize by averaging. It universalizes by going so specifically and honestly into one particular human situation that it arrives at something that belongs to everyone. Satoshi Kon knew that he was working in a medium that many people did not take seriously. He knew that animation, in the minds of most viewers and most critics, occupied a lower tier of cultural prestige than live-action film. He never accepted that hierarchy and he never stopped arguing against it through his work. Every film he made was an argument, made in the only language he trusted, the language of images and motion, that the human imagination deserves to be met with the full resources of artistic craft and intellectual honesty, regardless of the medium through which it chooses to speak. He made that argument 4 times in feature films and once across 13 television episodes. And then he was gone, at 46, before any of us were ready. Satoshi Kon. A man who told his stories in animated dreams. A man who made it impossible to tell the difference between being asleep and being awake. A man who in just over a decade of work compelled the history of world cinema to make room for a few new lines. Thank you, Satoshi Kon. See you next time.